A 67-year-old man sat across from me, trembling. Not because of pain, but because he believed something private, something he'd done alone his entire life, was now destroying his health. He thought masturbation was killing him. I'm Dr. James, a board-certified men's health specialist with over 30 years of experience helping older men reclaim their vitality, confidence, and clarity. I've worked with retired soldiers, widowers, grandfathers, and husbands from every walk of life, and I've seen firsthand how misinformation about aging and sexuality can quietly ruin lives. Here's the truth most men don't realize. It's not the act of masturbation that puts them at risk. It's what they believe about it, especially after the age of 60. The problem isn't physical, it's emotional, psychological, and silently spreading through social media and online fear movements. In the next few minutes, I'll show you the 6 most critical facts every man over 60 needs to know about masturbation. Facts that could help you protect your energy, your relationships, and your peace of mind. No shame, no scare tactics, just the medical truth every older man deserves to hear. And by the end, I'll also reveal the one dangerous belief that's quietly draining the life out of millions of older men, and how you can avoid becoming the next victim of it. Before we dive deeper, make sure you tap that subscribe button and turn on the bell, so you never miss another honest, science-based health message made for men over 60. And if you're finding this helpful so far, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0. I want to know how I can serve you better. Now that we've cleared the air, let's get into the 6 crucial truths every man over 60 needs to know about masturbation, because what you don't know at this age could quietly be working against your health and happiness. 1. Masturbation itself is not harmful, but context matters. When older men come to my office, they often hesitate before asking the question that's been bothering them in silence. They lower their voice, glance around, and finally say it. "Doctor, is it bad that I still masturbate?" There's always a pause after that. A pause filled with shame, fear, and decades of cultural baggage. And every time I look them in the eye and tell them what I'm about to tell you now. No, masturbation itself is not harmful. But the story we've built around it, especially in older age, is deeply misunderstood. Let's start with the facts. The act of masturbation by itself does not damage your prostate, weaken your heart, or cause erectile dysfunction. It doesn't sap your energy or make you less of a man. Your body was built with this function, and it continues to operate as part of your natural rhythm even as you age. Your body knows how to regulate itself. You're not doing anything wrong by honoring a biological function that's been with you your whole life. But here's where the real danger comes in. And it's not from your body, it's from your mind. Because the moment masturbation becomes your escape from loneliness, or the only place where you feel some control or pleasure, it starts to take on a different meaning. When it becomes habitual, compulsive, or emotionally numbing rather than fulfilling, that's when the balance tips. And in older age, when men often deal with retirement, grief, isolation, or loss of identity, that tipping point can be dangerously subtle. I've seen it too many times. A man loses his spouse or stops feeling desire toward his partner, or simply has more time alone, and gradually, without realizing it, masturbation becomes his coping mechanism. It goes from something natural to something secretive. He stops calling friends. He avoids new relationships. And slowly, that private behavior becomes a wall that separates him from connection, growth, and emotional health. It's not about the act itself, it's about what it's replacing. Here's a truth that might sting a little. Some men, without realizing it, are no longer masturbating for release, but out of habit, out of numbness, or because they don't know how to process their emotions. They tell themselves it's just a way to relax or feel alive for a moment, but deep down they feel emptier afterward, less connected, more ashamed, and often they don't know why. That's because the body isn't the problem. It's the intention behind the behavior and the lack of awareness around it. If you find yourself needing to do it repeatedly just to sleep, to distract from feelings of sadness, or to avoid intimacy with your partner, it's worth asking, what are you really craving? Is it release or connection? Is it sensation or significance? I remember one patient, a 71-year-old man, who broke down in my office after realizing he hadn't had a meaningful conversation in weeks, but had masturbated every day. He didn't feel shame about the act. He felt pain about the silence in his life that it was covering up. This is not about judgment. This is about reclaiming control, dignity, and awareness. You are allowed to experience pleasure. You're allowed to explore your body. But the question every man over 60 should ask is this helping me feel more alive or more alone? And that question leads us to a far deeper issue, one that's silently shaping how millions of older men experience their sexuality today. It's not about the body anymore, it's about the screen. In the next section, we're going to explore how pornography, once considered harmless, may be reshaping not just how you feel about sex, but how your brain responds to real intimacy, and why many men don't even realize it's happening. If you're still here and these insights are resonating with you, type 1 in the comments to let me know you're walking this path with me. Now let's keep going and take a closer look at point number 2. 2. Porn-induced dependency is quietly eroding intimacy. Let me tell you something I've had to explain to more and more men in recent years. Good men, honest men, older men like you and me. Men who grew up long before the internet, before smartphones, before intimacy was replaced by search bars and endless tabs. These men come into my office wondering why they no longer feel the spark in their marriage, or why they can't maintain an erection with someone they care about, even though everything works just fine when they're alone. And after a few minutes of hesitation, the truth comes out. I've been watching porn, they say, a lot more than I ever used to. This is where things get serious. Because unlike the natural act of masturbation, pornography changes how your brain reacts to stimulation and how your heart connects to intimacy. That's not an opinion, that's neuroscience. When you watch porn, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical triggered by gambling, sugar, or drugs. It gives you a surge of excitement, novelty, and reward. But over time, your brain starts to depend on that novelty. And real-life touch, real eye contact, real emotion, well, it doesn't feel the same anymore. The screen becomes easier, faster, safer, and intimacy, that deep connection you once longed for, becomes more difficult to reach and harder to enjoy. I once treated a man in his mid-60s who had been happily married for over 30 years. He loved his wife deeply, but over time, their physical connection faded. He turned to porn as a way to feel something again. At first, it seemed harmless. But slowly, the real damage began. He stopped initiating affection. He began to avoid vulnerable conversations. His wife noticed, but couldn't quite name what had changed. And when he finally confessed, she cried, not because he watched porn, but because she felt replaced by a screen. That's the part most men misunderstand. It's not just about the videos, it's about what you lose without realizing it. Emotional presence, desire, responsiveness. These things don't disappear overnight. They erode silently day by day as your brain is trained to expect stimulation without intimacy, release without relationship. You might be thinking, I only watch a little, it doesn't affect me. And maybe that's true right now, but I urge you to ask yourself this. Is it getting harder to feel aroused without a screen? Are your fantasies more intense than the real thing? Do you feel disconnected afterward, like something was missing? If the answer is yes, you're not broken. You're just caught in something that millions of older men are facing and few are willing to talk about. Because admitting you're struggling with porn in your 60s or 70s doesn't feel easy. It feels awkward, even shameful. But you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not stuck. You see, the human brain is incredibly adaptive, even as we age. I've seen men in their 70s retrain their minds, rekindle their marriages, and rediscover the joy of simple, real closeness. But it starts by telling the truth. Porn isn't neutral, and it's not harmless, especially not after 60, when dopamine regulation becomes more fragile and emotional intimacy becomes more precious. We live in a time when everything is fast, instant, and digital. But your soul was not made for that kind of shortcut. You were made for connection, not algorithms. If porn has become your quiet habit, your invisible comfort, or your hidden escape, it may be time to reclaim something deeper, not just your libido, but your capacity for closeness. And here's where it gets even more concerning, because while many older men are focused on porn, there's another problem growing in the background, one that's far more dangerous because it disguises itself as self-control and discipline. It's a modern belief system that's spreading fast, telling men they must never ejaculate if they want to stay strong and youthful. But what if that message is actually harming the very men it claims to help? Let's talk about semen anxiety and the silent psychological war it's starting inside the minds of men your age. 3. The rise of semen anxiety is real and dangerous. There's something quietly spreading among older men today, something I never expected to see gaining ground in Western medicine. I call it semen anxiety, but the clinical term is DOT syndrome, a psychological condition that convinces men they're losing life force, strength, or health every time they ejaculate. And to be honest, I didn't think I'd ever be talking to American men about this. It originated in parts of South Asia, where cultural and traditional beliefs taught that semen was sacred, a powerful life energy that must be preserved. But now, in my practice here in the States, I'm seeing more and more men over 60 walk in with this fear planted deep in their minds. Not because they studied ancient medicine, not because they heard it from their doctors, but because of what they read and believed on the internet. There's a whole movement online now preaching semen retention as a path to power. Videos claiming that every drop of semen you lose is a drop of your strength. Forums filled with stories about superhuman energy from going weeks or months without ejaculation. They promise increased masculinity, mental clarity, success, even spiritual enlightenment. And while those promises sound appealing, especially to someone feeling tired, disconnected, or uncertain about aging, the science doesn't back any of it. Let me be very clear. There is no medical evidence, none, that losing semen through ejaculation causes physical weakness, cognitive decline, or emotional instability. Semen is primarily made of water, proteins, and trace minerals. Your body is fully equipped to regenerate it, just as it regenerates skin cells, blood cells, and saliva. Ejaculating doesn't rob you of vitality, it's part of the natural rhythm of being alive. So why do some men swear they feel worse after sex or masturbation? That's the real question. And the answer isn't in the body, it's in the mind. What we're dealing with is not a physical condition but a psychological phenomenon, a fear so strong it starts creating the very symptoms men are afraid of. Fatigue, depression, low motivation. They're not the result of ejaculation, they're the result of chronic worry, guilt, and internal stress. This is called somatization, when the body starts reacting to emotional distress as if it were a physical illness. I had a patient in his late 60s who'd fallen deep into these online beliefs. He'd stopped all forms of sexual release for nearly 3 months, convinced it would restore his energy, but instead his anxiety skyrocketed. He became irritable, obsessed with counting days, constantly reading posts that made him doubt his every thought, every impulse. He wasn't empowered, he was imprisoned. And when he finally let go of those beliefs and returned to a healthy rhythm, the change in his mood and body was almost immediate. Not because of the semen, but because the fear had finally lifted. Here's the painful irony. Trying to hold on to power by denying your body's natural release can end up weakening your emotional stability far more than any ejaculation ever could. Your body is wise. It was not built to be suppressed. It was built to flow, to regulate, to heal, to balance. You see, this fear of semen loss, this anxiety cloaked as discipline, often appeals most to men who are already struggling with age-related changes. The slowing down, the loss of youthful energy, the drop in drive, it makes them feel like they've lost control, and these beliefs offer a false solution, a promise that if they just retain enough, everything will come back. But what's truly needed is not retention, it's understanding. Understanding that aging is not weakness, that release is not failure, that self-worth is not measured by how many days you abstain. You are not less of a man because your body changes. You are more of one when you learn to live with truth, not fear. And while semen anxiety is quietly rising, there's another myth running alongside it, just as dangerous. It's the idea that ejaculation lowers testosterone, that every climax chips away at your masculinity, your strength, your manhood. But is there any truth to that? In the next section, I'll show you exactly what science says about testosterone, aging, and ejaculation, and what every older man needs to stop blaming. If you're still watching and this message is resonating with you, type 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. Now let's continue with point number 4, because what comes next may challenge everything you've believed about masculinity and aging. 4. Testosterone is not affected long-term by ejaculation. If I had $1 for every older man who's asked me if ejaculation was draining their testosterone, I'd probably be retired by now. But here's the part that breaks my heart. Many of these men aren't asking out of casual curiosity. They're asking with fear in their eyes. They're afraid that something perfectly natural, something they've done their whole lives, might now be the very thing robbing them of their strength, their energy, their manhood. And who can blame them? There's no shortage of so-called experts online telling them that ejaculation lowers testosterone, that every time they climax, they're chipping away at the very hormone that makes them a man. But here's what I want you to know, not as a scientist talking down to you, but as a doctor who stood beside thousands of men facing the same fear. This belief is false, and it's costing you more than you think. Yes, there is some truth buried in the confusion, but it's been blown out of proportion. What the studies actually show is that short-term abstinence, let's say 2 to 3 days, can cause a very slight temporary increase in testosterone levels. But it's like the tide going in and out. It rises for a moment, then returns to normal. It's not enough to boost your energy, muscle mass, or performance in any meaningful way. And long-term, there is no reliable evidence that frequent ejaculation causes a chronic drop in testosterone in healthy men. None. So why does this myth keep spreading like wildfire? Because many older men are already dealing with the natural decline of testosterone that comes with age. And instead of understanding the full picture, they grab onto the nearest explanation that sounds simple and scary. They blame ejaculation because it feels like the one thing they still control. But in truth, it's not ejaculation that's draining you. It's everything else you might be ignoring. Let me explain what really impacts testosterone levels, especially after 60. Poor sleep, chronic stress, excess abdominal fat, lack of physical activity, high blood sugar, sedentary lifestyle, alcohol overuse. These are the real culprits, and they do far more damage to your hormones than anything that happens in the privacy of your bedroom. One patient of mine, 69 years old, came in convinced that his weekly masturbation habit was the reason he felt tired, sluggish, and low in mood. He had read a dozen blogs warning that ejaculation kills testosterone. But when we ran his labs and looked deeper, the real problem became clear. He wasn't sleeping more than 5 hours a night, his blood pressure was up, and he hadn't exercised in over a year. His testosterone wasn't dropping because he was ejaculating. It was dropping because he wasn't taking care of his body. When we addressed those lifestyle factors, when he improved his sleep, started walking every day, cleaned up his diet, his energy came back, his confidence came back, and yes, his testosterone levels rose. Not because he stopped masturbating, but because he stopped blaming it. Here's the irony. Obsessing over how often you ejaculate may actually cause more stress than benefit. And stress, as we know, is one of the fastest ways to suppress your hormone production. So in trying to protect your testosterone, you may be unintentionally harming it. That's the trap of misinformation. It turns your focus away from what matters most. You don't need to be afraid of release. You need to be aware of your lifestyle. You need to treat your body like a system that works together, not a single lever that's going to break if you pull it too many times. Your masculinity is not that fragile, and your testosterone is not that easily stolen. So if you've been living with the belief that ejaculation is sabotaging your health, I'm here to say, let that fear go. The science simply doesn't support it. What will change your life is not holding back. It's building up everything else that supports healthy aging. But now let's take a deeper look into what happens when fear takes physical form, when anxiety, guilt, and misinformation don't just stay in the mind, but begin to show up in your body. Because there's one more dangerous twist in this story, when your belief in weakness actually makes you feel weaker. That's where we go next. 5. The real risk is the shame and isolation. There's a kind of suffering I see far too often in older men, but it rarely shows up in blood work or test results. It hides beneath the surface. It lives in silence. And its name is shame. I've sat across from men in their late 60s, early 70s, even into their 80s. Men who've built careers, raised families, fought wars, and carried burdens most people will never know. And yet when the subject of masturbation comes up, I see them shrink. They look down. Their voices drop. Some even apologize. And not because they've done anything wrong, but because somewhere along the way they were taught that something natural, even human, is something to be ashamed of. That shame, more than the act itself, is what's quietly harming men in their later years. You see, it's not the physical release that's hurting anyone, it's the secrecy, the guilt, the isolation. It's the belief that you're the only one still doing this, that you've somehow failed to outgrow it, or that it makes you less of a man. These thoughts don't just stay in the mind, they echo in the body. They manifest as low self-esteem, social withdrawal, chronic stress, and even symptoms that mimic depression. Many men assume the fatigue they feel, the irritability, the sense of emptiness must be caused by ejaculation. But it's not. It's caused by how they feel about it. The real damage comes from holding something so normal inside, never speaking of it, and letting that silence become a prison. And here's where the misunderstanding runs deepest. Some men believe that the solution is to cut it out completely, to abstain, to suppress, to fix themselves by denying themselves. But what they're really doing is reinforcing the idea that their body is the enemy, that their desire is a threat, that pleasure at their age is inappropriate. That could not be further from the truth. You were made for connection, for closeness, for touch. Whether that connection comes from a partner or from a moment of personal reflection, it's still part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate desire, it's to understand it, to bring it into the light, to handle it with wisdom, not fear. I remember one man, 76 years old, widowed for nearly a decade, who told me he'd stopped masturbating completely. I thought it was the mature thing to do, he said, but I didn't feel stronger. I felt lonelier. That hit me hard, because that's what this is really about, loneliness. Not hormones, not stamina, not frequency, but the deep human need to feel seen, to feel alive, to feel a sense of worth, especially when the world stops looking your way the way it once did. When masturbation becomes hidden, shameful, or compulsive, it isolates you from that worth. But when it's understood, when it's brought into a healthy, honest perspective, it can simply be a part of how you stay connected to your own body and emotions. If you're feeling alone in this, let me assure you, you are not the only one. There are millions of older men silently carrying the same questions, the same shame, the same stories. The difference is you're choosing to listen. You're choosing to look at it with open eyes, and that makes all the difference. There's nothing weak about seeking truth. There's nothing shameful about learning your body's language at every age, and there's nothing wrong with desiring comfort, release, or even intimacy, whether you're 26 or 76. But what happens when you've held on to that shame for so long that it starts affecting you physically? When the emotional weight begins to show up in your sleep, your heart, even your prostate, that's where we turn next, because your body, especially after 60, is always speaking. And if you listen closely, it may be trying to tell you something important about how you're treating it. 6. Aging doesn't mean giving up pleasure, it means understanding it better. One of the hardest things for many older men to accept is that their bodies have changed. It's not just about slower reflexes or stiffer joints, it's about something far more personal. It's about pleasure, desire, response. The things we once took for granted suddenly become more complicated, and many men are left wondering if their best days are behind them. I've seen it again and again, men in their 60s, 70s, even 80s who quietly carry the fear that they're no longer normal. They notice it takes longer to get aroused, that their erections aren't as firm, that the intensity of orgasm has softened, and because no one talks about it openly, they start to believe they're broken, that something is wrong, that maybe they failed as men. But let me tell you something with all the sincerity I can muster, this is not failure. This is aging, and it is completely natural. You are not alone. You are not defective. You are simply in a new chapter, and like every chapter in life, it requires new understanding. The truth is, your relationship with pleasure needs to evolve. What once worked in your 20s or 30s might not feel the same now, and that's okay. Your body isn't betraying you, it's asking for a different kind of attention. A slower pace, a deeper connection, a shift from performance to presence. One man I spoke with, age 73, said it best. In my younger years, sex was like fire. Fast, hot, instinctive. Now, it's more like warm sunlight. It takes longer to rise, but it lasts longer, and it means more. That's wisdom earned over time. That's intimacy refined by life. But here's the catch. Many men don't give themselves permission to discover that. Instead, they cling to old expectations, old standards, and old comparisons. They chase intensity instead of intimacy. They measure pleasure in speed and frequency instead of emotional closeness or satisfaction. And when their body can't keep up with those outdated ideas, they think the problem is with them. It's not. The real problem is that we were never taught how to age sexually. No one ever told us that pleasure can mature, that it can slow down and still be beautiful. That touch can become more meaningful, not less. That your desires don't disappear, they deepen. And that's why I want every older man to stop chasing a version of manhood that no longer serves him. Because the truth is, you haven't lost your power. You just haven't learned how to listen to it differently. Pleasure after 60 is about awareness. It's about being present in your body without judgment. It's about reconnecting with sensation, emotion, and even vulnerability. Yes, vulnerability, because allowing yourself to be open, to feel, to experience without pressure is not weakness. It's a new kind of strength. And when it comes to masturbation, this shift is essential. What might have once been a quick release can now become a more conscious act, one of self-respect, self-care, and connection to your changing body. It's no longer about chasing what was, it's about honoring what is. When you begin to understand that aging isn't the end of pleasure, but the evolution of it, everything changes. You stop fearing your body, you start working with it, and that more than anything brings peace. So the next time you find yourself frustrated, disconnected, or doubtful, remember this: your capacity for joy hasn't vanished. It's just waiting for you to meet it where you are today, not where you were 30 years ago. And now, as we close this conversation, it's time to return to something I mentioned earlier, something that's quietly draining the life out of millions of older men. It's not masturbation, it's not age, it's a single dangerous belief that turns normal urges into sources of fear, guilt, and withdrawal. A belief that pretends to protect your masculinity but ends up suffocating it instead. And by the end, I'll also reveal the one dangerous belief that's quietly draining the life out of millions of older men and how you can avoid becoming the next victim of it. The one dangerous belief that's quietly draining millions of men. Here it is, the belief that's causing more harm to older men than the act of masturbation itself. A belief that sneaks into your thoughts, disguised as discipline. That pretends to make you stronger, more focused, more in control, but in reality, it does the exact opposite. The belief that you must suppress your desire in order to be healthy, worthy, or masculine. This idea, planted by online movements, half-truths, and misinformed voices, tells men over 60 that ejaculation is weakness, that abstaining is the only way to reclaim their strength, that desire should be denied, that aging bodies can no longer carry sexuality with dignity. And here's what that belief is doing behind closed doors. It's making men anxious, ashamed, disconnected, and physically unwell. It's turning normal urges into sources of guilt. It's pushing older men deeper into silence, away from connection, and deeper into isolation. I've seen men who tried to master this belief only to find themselves more irritable, depressed, and emotionally numb than ever before. They weren't becoming stronger, they were becoming afraid of their own biology. Let me be clear, your desire is not your enemy. Your body is not your enemy, and aging does not mean you've lost your right to pleasure, intimacy, or self-respect. The truth is, what your body needs now is not more restriction, it's more understanding. Not more shame, but more self-compassion. Not perfection, but presence. So if you've been living under this belief, if you've felt guilt after every release, if you've questioned whether you've failed by following your body's natural rhythm, it's time to let go of that weight. You haven't failed. You've simply been misled. And I want you to know this, there is a path forward. You're still a man. You're still whole. You're still deserving. If no one said it to you lately, let me say it now, clearly and without hesitation. You are still a man, not half of one, not past your prime, not someone to be dismissed or forgotten. You are still whole. You've lived, you've endured, you've adapted, and that means you carry something powerful, wisdom. Your worth has never depended on how often you perform, how strong your erection is, or whether you've abstained or released. It lies in your ability to understand yourself with honesty, to meet your changing body with compassion, and to remain connected to what makes you feel alive. You don't need to hide. You don't need to apologize. You simply need to give yourself permission to let go of the guilt, question the false beliefs, and to return to your body, not with fear but with respect. Aging doesn't diminish your value, it refines it. So walk forward not with shame, but with confidence. You are not less of a man. You are a man becoming more aware, and there is no greater strength than that. If this message spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Click subscribe for more honest, science-based health advice made for men like you. And if you're ready to break the silence around aging and intimacy, type "I'm still here" in the comments below. Let's remind the world that growing older doesn't mean growing weaker. It means growing wiser.